Hey Tricksters, and welcome to another episode of Exploring Boundaries with Loki Consulting. Today we're going to talk about planning meetings and how to make them useful, and that means we're going to talk about estimating. And we're also going to talk about how estimating actually fits into the flow, which means we're going to talk about velocity as well. Note, for this we're going to talk about the standard bastardized Scrum approach to Agile with planning, stand-ups, demos, and retro. If you're doing Kanban, it's a different conversation. So this video is interesting, maybe educational, but it's not going to be practical for you, not directly anyway. Still, if you're using Kanban, leave a comment. I love to meet people who do. So first things first, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, with the planning meeting, we want to agree on what the highest deliverable value is and commit to it. And how are we going to do that? Well, just by merging the product owner's estimated value delivered with the rest of the team's estimated complexity to deliver. So we need to have a conversation and merge that understanding together, and that's the purpose of the planning meeting. So why do we do it this way? Well, because complexity is a usable proxy for size of work. But why? That's because the work is always new to us, so we can't really do something better than that. It might be similar to other work we've done in the past, and it might be work we can imagine done based on our current knowledge, but it isn't real yet. It turns out that the shared understanding of complexity is a reliable, self-consistent measure for the work, and that can be used to compare the amount of work that can be delivered iteration over iteration, so from planning meeting to planning meeting. Note that if you're looking for long-term prediction, you want something else. Subscribe and donate for another video on tools like risk-adjusted burn-up charts or Monte Carlo forecasts. Before we continue, I do want to highlight something important about using complexity as a metric. Complexity is not an exact metric. Complexity is a range. We'll come back to that when we talk about velocity. Just keep this in mind for now, okay? I want to say this now because otherwise you're going to hear a whole bunch of things, and it's going to be a big mental shift when I introduce this idea later. Okay, so what are the steps of the planning meeting? Well, for each story that we want to maybe do, we talk about it, and then we put a number on it. That's it. That's how it works. Now, in all the steps you will always have seen in planning meetings, we're always going to start with the number first. And the reason we start with the number is because it's an anchor for the conversation about the differences in perspective. It's not about whether we agree on the implementation, but on the complexity. So while it's nice if everybody in the team gives the same number, it's better if everybody actually is able to reflect the difference in understanding of complexity. And that means it's better if everyone understands the relative difference between each number. Now, the way this is often done is with a tool called Planning Poker. And this is what Planning Poker looks like. Like most tool, this one tries to allow for many ways to use it because everyone wants to do their own thing. And that's great. Every team gets to have their own way of talking about this. The common mistake that I've seen in a lot of teams is that teams try to use all of the cards. Let's look at what it would mean to use this in one specific way. The idea here is to choose one system that is going to be self-consistent and is going to allow for meaningful conversations about complexity so that you can put a useful estimate on the story. My choice is the Fibonacci sequence. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, maybe 13, and definitely the question mark. Now here's all the cards I think you need. You may disagree with me, and if you do, you fall into one of two camps. One is you have good reasons, because you operate with a different self-consistent system. One different system you could be using might be t-shirt sizes. You might have small, medium, and large in your team, and that might be good enough, and your team might operate very effectively with this. Now, I will submit to you that a team that does small, medium, and large is a team that's doing Fibonacci with 1, 2, and 3, or 3, 5, and 8, or whatever. But that you have less variance in the size of the work, and that's actually really, really good. So congratulations if you're able to do that. Anyway, you could be in two camps if you disagree with me. One is you have a different self-consistent system, and the other one is you have bad reasons to disagree with me based on incorrect assumptions about how the planning works and what it's for. The irony is that all of you who disagree are likely to think you belong to the first category, and I could be wrong about me thinking you have bad reasons, right? I could be the one who's wrong. So leave a comment and tell me how and why you disagree with me. I would love to learn something new. One reason I like Fibonacci is because it represents an uneven growth. 5 is not quite twice 3. 8 is not quite twice 5. But between 3 and 8 is a big shift. Uneven makes it psychologically easier to pick one, even if we're not sure why. Now, a note about the way we handle the planning meeting. We want to have conversations in this meeting. We want to surface all the conversations that are useful to have, and we don't want to have any that aren't useful to have, because we really don't want to spend any more time than we have to in this conversation, right? We want to go back to coding or whatever it is you're doing. If you're a designer, if you're a product manager, you want to go back and do work. So in order to make this conversation in this meeting as productive as possible, you want to focus on conversations that talk about complexity. You don't want to talk about the implementation, or as little as necessary. So let's talk about a concrete example. Let's say we want to provide refund credits when the customer cancels an order instead of providing money back. Let's set the scene a little bit. Let's say Jake is our product owner, and then we have 4 engineers. We have Alice, Bob, Cora, and Daniel. Alice puts down a 3, Bob puts down a 5, Cora puts down a 2, and Daniel, who's new to the team, puts down a question mark. Now let's talk about what happens right after they put down those cards. This is the most important part. Now the engineers have to align on the complexity. They have to figure out what this means. So we want to limit what we say to clarifying questions and information about complexity. Daniel puts down the question mark because he's new to the team and this is his first planning meeting, so he's just mostly out of the conversation for this. Alice says, I think it's a 3 because we have to store this. So there's a new database table. There's a bunch of tests we have to add around that. Bob says, I think it's a 5 because we need to check whether the credits need to expire or not. This is already a bit odd because Bob probably should have asked this question before you went into estimating, but that's okay. No one is perfect and the planning meetings are very organic. So however the teams choose to do this is completely fine as long as you get all the information you need out of it. So the product owner, Jake, here chimes in to ask what changes if the credits have to expire. And Bob says, well, if they expire, we have to keep track of the individual credits so we can expire them instead of just a tally of credits. And now Cora speaks up and Cora says, well, while we should keep track of individual credits anyway, because it's money, it's a 2 because we already have an event sourcing pattern implemented, so we just have to build on top of that. Now the 4 of them exchange another few sentences to line up their thoughts on storage, event sourcing, additional required logic and presentation, and eventually they agree that there is less complexity than they originally thought, and all the engineers agree that this should be a 2. And Cora indicates that whoever pulls that story should also pair with Daniel on it. So at the end of the planning meeting, the team has agreed that they're going to commit to deliver a few stories, each with agreed upon estimated complexity. Over time, we can get this velocity as a watermark for how much work we can commit to. So let's say here, for instance, 3, 5, 2, 3, and 3, that's 5 stories for a total of 16 points. Now we're going to talk about what this means. What are those 16 points? Remember how complexity is a range? Here is some completely made up numbers that I have added to showcase that. The only reason these numbers are made up is because I wasn't measuring a team at the time. So while these are representatives of how it actually works, these aren't necessarily real-world examples. Either way, the important point here is that these numbers overlap. I'm going to say this again. The ranges of numbers overlap. If you look, you will see that a 2, which is 2 to 4 hours, could take less time than a 1, which is 1 to 3 hours. But it probably won't, etc., right? The low watermark for a 3 is 3 hours. The high watermark for a 2 is 4 hours. So it's possible that a 3 will be done faster than a 2. It's just very unlikely, because the range for a 3 goes all the way up to 8 hours. This also explains why the points that we estimate do not translate to the answer to the question how long it takes. That's because the overall velocity can be used as a proxy as the various estimates collapse together and the uncertainty resolves itself. So estimates aren't time, and velocity is only a proxy for time, but it's good enough as long as you understand its limits. Now, I've just said something that makes a lot of people very unhappy, right? But I want to know how long it's going to take. And I am here to tell you that until your organization is all done with all its horse feathering, you will never know how long something is going to take, because you have to be solid enough as an organization to measure something known as the lead time, which is the total time elapsed from work request received to work delivered. There's also another important metric, cycle time, but those two metrics are for another video. Teasers, you want small batches of work, and you need to limit the number of queues that the work goes through. In summary, estimates are a proxy for complexity. Velocity is a proxy for cycle time. It's a proxy for generally how long it takes for something to go from work beginning to work delivered. Velocity is a terrible tool for forecasting beyond the next iteration. Self-consistency in these metrics is the only thing that matters in order for these to be useful for a conversation. That's it. Hey tricksters, thanks for watching. If you like this, smash that like, subscribe, and consider donating so I can keep making content for you. See you all next time.